You know, right. Nick Durst here, of course, along with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, to our guest today, I am not going to wish him a happy new year. He did tweet out that the deadline on January 11th was 5 p.m. to wish people a happy new year. So we don't want to get his $150 fine. So we're going to have him on here today. He's very accomplished baseball columnist. He's worked at a few great papers, and we see him on TV a lot as well. So Joe, let everybody know who our special guest is here today.
I first met him 7 years ago. Actually, it's almost 8 years ago now. He came to Marist, and when we had the Associated Press Sports Editors Conference, I got to meet him for the first time, and he was outstanding. And I don't know if he remembers me or not. I hope he does. He's currently a national baseball writer for the New York Post. So once again, we're going to have another great employee of the New York Post on our program, Mr. Ken Davidoff. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Joe, full disclosure, I remember that Marist event well.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember me necessarily, but I do.
You were a student there?
I was a student there.
Wow, good for you.
Okay. I believe we had it in 2013. I don't think we had
2013 because I had broken my leg and I was either still in my cast or a walking boot. I remember.
Yeah. So we had that up there. We had some great baseball comment. That's going to be one of the central themes of what we discussed today here on the show.
So, Kevin, I want to take you back to your high school days, and we want to know, did you know then or before, or did you wait till college to say, I want to pursue a career in journalism and specifically in sports?
Yeah, I knew when I was 7 years old, Nick. I grew up in New Jersey. Every morning I would read the New York Star-Ledger. This was in the late 70s. The Yankees had their run 2 World Series in a row. And I loved reading a gentleman named Moss Klein, the Star-Ledger's Yankees beat writer, bit of a legendary figure in New York baseball writing circles. And I just read Moss, and I said, this is what I want to do. I decided at that young age that I was fortunate enough to attain that goal. And then obviously, as you become an adult, you want to keep going. So I've been fortunate enough to now become a baseball columnist at the Post.
So you decide to go to one of the hugest sports schools there is for college. You go to the University of Michigan, and you're from New Jersey, so you know cold weathers, but I hear nothing hits you quite like the cold of Michigan. So what was the process like for you deciding to go there, and how did you decide to make the move there for college?
Well, it's interesting. I really was focused on journalism, except for Michigan. So I applied to 5 colleges, which was about the average back in those days. Now I have a son approaching that process, and he'll be applying to far more than 5. But I applied to Northwestern, Michigan, Boston University, Syracuse, and George Washington. And of those 5, only Michigan did not have a serious undergraduate journalism program. But I got rejected from Northwestern, which was my first choice. And then Michigan, I was just so drawn, despite the absence of an academic journalism major, I was just drawn by the school's reputation. I visited the campus, fell in love with it. The big sports programs, I think I thought that, okay, even if I just cover these for the school newspaper, that will help me professionally. So that's how I wound up at Michigan.
Yeah, it's a bunch of outstanding schools there. And I was going to get to that because Michigan is definitely one of those 10, 15, 20 blue blood journalism programs throughout the country. And it has produced a lot of terrific journalists. You look at Adam Schefter, Rich Eisen, a lot of really, really successful names have come out of Michigan, and that's including yourself. You were at Michigan at a really great time. I believe you were there from 89 to 93. You had the last wide receiver to win the Heisman Trophy was Desmond Howard before this year with Devontae Smith. So I'm sure you had really, really great times watching Michigan football. Obviously, Michigan basketball just made some history. They became the first ranked team to beat 3 straight ranked teams by double digits, recently. So that's really great too. So what were your best experiences at Michigan? Not only working with the great journalism program that they have there, but just stuff that you got to do on campus, go to sporting events, et cetera.
Yeah, so let me just clarify. First of all, it was a great student newspaper. There was no journalism program, which is why, to their credit, they've gotten better. But yeah, in terms of the sports, yeah, it was fantastic. So my very first event that I attended as a fan, my freshman year, was a very famous Michigan Notre Dame football game in which a gentleman named Rocket Ishmael, Rocky, I forget his actual first name, Rocket Ishmael, returned 2 kickoffs for touchdowns. And Notre Dame beat Michigan in Ann Arbor. And this was Bo Schembechler's last year coaching. I was a heartbreaker. And then my 4-year run ended with Chris Webber's timeout. So really heartbreaking bookends. And that was in New Orleans at the Superdome. I was covering that for the school newspaper.
Wow.
In between, a lot of great moments. You mentioned Desmond. Desmond actually lived in my hall my very first semester at school. He was quite the character. And who else did I get to see? Football. Oh, Tyrone Wheatley was an excellent player. And then the Fab Five arrived my junior year in basketball. So that was a lot of fun too. Furthermore, the hockey team, which has been very good for a long time now, reached the tournament, the NCAA tournament for the first time, I think, in Red Berenson's time coaching there. Red went on to have a legendary run coaching the team. So yeah, tons of great sports memories from my time there as a student. And I that's the one team I still root for. In my job, I can't root for any baseball teams. I really don't care about any of the pro sports except when like a Michigan alum is on one of the teams like Tom Brady. And then otherwise I just root for all the Michigan sports.
Interesting you say that. Obviously, the Mets had some Michigan ties. So when the Mets did their annual spring training game against the University of Michigan baseball team, you rooting for Michigan there?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was the schedule usually worked out that I was there that weekend. I became a little friendly with the coach Eric Bakich, and then some of their administrative people. But yeah, it was always fun to see them play.
Excellent. So during your time in college, you do a few internships with CBS News, CBS Radio, and Oliver Productions. So did that experience help you either from a networking perspective or just honing your skills? And then what were you able to do in order to get that first real full-time job out of college with the record of Hackensack as a sports writer?
Yeah, so it was basically, I mean, my college professional experiences helped, I think, from just in terms of learning about how to do work and also boosting the resume. I didn't make too many connections that really converted over to helping me get jobs after college, but it was just, I think I had a pretty good resume because of the experiences you mentioned. And then I didn't get off my first full-time job until I was out of college for 3 years. So I grinded away a lot of part-time jobs and in newspapers as well as radio. And I even interned at a magazine. And I was very fortunate that my parents let me move back home, for free. So they welcomed me back after college, and that made it economically viable for me to do what I did.
No doubt about it. Then at the Record, you become the Yankees beat writer. So what was that like? Only a few years out of college and you're on the beat. I mean, it must have been some incredible times for you.
Yeah, so I got a lot of reps starting in 1996. I covered a lot of Yankees games. Our Records beat writer Yankee beat writer at that time was Bob Klapisch, who remains a good friend and really a great mentor. Taught me a lot about the business, about how to do the job. And so in 96 and 97, I got a lot of work, as his backup essentially. And then in 1998, Clapp got promoted to baseball columnist, and I took over the beat. I became the beat writer. And so by the time I took over the beat, I had a pretty good feel for the team. I didn't walk in completely blind. I knew some players, I knew some executives, and I knew Joe Torre and so on. But it's still a bear to be the frontline person. And I was exhausted at the end of that first year. I'm sure, as you know, the 1998 Yankees, a historically great team, probably one of the best 5 teams in baseball history. And I remember feeling like they swept the Padres in the World Series, and I was in San Diego, and I was just so relieved it was over because I was so tired. And I remember thinking I didn't do that good a job at this job this year, and I will learn from this year. And I did. I mean, moving forward, just as a player learns all the rhythms of a sports season, a reporter covering the team learns all the rhythms and learns how to pace him or herself better. So yeah, it was definitely very intimidating that first year.
Yeah, you basically gave me a really great lead in. Obviously, the 98 Yankees were superb. But that team itself was bookended. The run started. You could honestly say it started in 95, even when they still had Buck Showalter. And then they brought in Joe Torre, obviously. And I've had the privilege of meeting Joe Torre once before. I think he's tremendously, wonderful guy. I think he's perfect, the right personality for what he does for Major League Baseball. So during that time, you got to cover, I think you could honestly say, probably the greatest run in the history of sports, what the Yankees were able to accomplish with the 4 World Championships in 5 years. At any point, were you intimidated? Because again, at this time, you're still just a few years out of college. There are a lot of people at that time who have been in the business 10 years, 20 years, who've had a significant amount more experience than you did. And you're still kind of this young cub, finding your legs, really honing your craft, finding your voice, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. Was it intimidating for you? Were there certain people at that time who had more experience than you that you reached out to for advice, for tidbits of maybe they give you input on how to reach out to certain players? Because there were a lot of really big personalities at that time for the Yankees. You can go right on down the line from the pitching staff to Roger Clemens. They had Darryl Strawberry come in for a brief period of time. So what was that like? Was there anybody who at that time really, really helped you?
Yeah, so it was even though it could be very competitive between, you are competing against each other news outlets, especially the traveling outlets. You're competing to put together the best stories and get the best information. It was generally a very welcoming community. So many of my elders in the field were welcoming and embraced me, because I hope it was because they saw that I took the job seriously, and they offered advice, or even if they didn't offer it, I just watched them. But you go to dinners, like I would go to dinner with John Heyman, who I later worked with alongside at Newsday, and Joel Sherman, who I work alongside now at the Post, and people like that. And yeah, you just talk. So it wasn't as explicit as, "Hey Joel, hey John, can you give me some advice?" But it was just spending time around them, learning through osmosis, through observation, and through conversation.
So now let's get to your time in Newsday, because it seems like there's a rite of passage when it comes to New York writers and media. It seems like they eventually end up in Newsday, whether they are an intern there, whether they're working there. I don't know how this works. I know a bunch of my friends who I went to school with. So I went to Marist. Nick graduated from St.
I
John's.
remember.
Right. But yeah, so I have friends who are in the communications. They work other jobs, but they were interns at Newsday. You were at Newsday for 11 years. Very, very impressive run there. So take us through your time transitioning from going from the Record to the Newsday. Who reached out to you? Did you reach out to them? Is that something that you wanted to transition to? How did that opportunity come about for you, and who made that happen?
Well, it's a very, I just said it's a very welcoming and competitive community. It's also a very small community in reality. So Newsday's Yankees beat writer, a gentleman named Larry Rocca, I knew very well. We remained good friends. So he told me, "I'm leaving the Yankees beat." He switched over to the New York Star Ledger at the time to cover the Mets. Excuse me. So I don't. I mean, at that point, I had a relationship with John Heyman, who was at Newsday. I don't remember exactly who said what to who, but I let John know whether I initiated or he initiated. Yes, I absolutely was interested in sliding over. When you're talking about bigger circulation and more pay, and more exposure. So once I got the offer, it was a pretty easy decision to leave. And the only adjustment really was just working at a place with more resources, more willing to travel, more people to different places, and more copy editors. So, I enjoyed my time at the Record, but it just really it was a matter of size and resources.
What's an easier story for you to write? When a team is good, dominating, winning championships, or when there's a scandal or a collapse? Obviously you're on the Yankees beat 2004, and I could imagine that was an ALCS that was easier for you to write storylines on, and that must have been crazy. And you don't have to worry about deadline in Game 7 because you had the story ready to go. But
I did.
there was a lot. There was just a lot going on there in that playoff run. So, for you personally, do you prefer to, being in a place where the teams are dominating and easy winning, or scandal or collapse with the Mets or Yankees or something like that?
Yeah, scandals are our filet mignon. I mean, scandals, we can, you can never go wrong with a good scandal. I mean, that Astros scandal last year was extraordinary, and we'll never know how it would have played out if not for COVID. But I mean, that story was just a gift that kept on giving until our freaking country got shut down by coronavirus. But yeah, the scandal is always the top preference. And those can be exhausting. As sometimes going back to A-Rod with all of A-Rod's scandals. I joke around now with Alex, like, Alex, you kept our industry in business. Thank God.
Yeah.
You and Trump.
When A-Rod was suing Major League Baseball, I mean, that was just, you guys are probably camped out outside the WFAN. He goes over there to Mike Francesa's.
Yeah.
Everyone's chasing him. He's at the courts. Wild stuff.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. So that's scandals are where it's at. That's where the good stuff is.
So to piggyback off of Nick's point, so I want to get into social media and its role, especially when you're writing different types of stories, because now more than ever, we as fans and readers and listeners and so on, we have more access to people like you, more so than we ever have before. Now, with that comes a platform, and I'm sure you and your colleagues understand that there are good apples who will reach out to you, who will praise your work, who will religiously read the stuff that you write, who enjoy the stuff that you write, who have followed you for 5, 10, 15 years. And then there are the bad apples, the ones who just leave the scathing replies. Whatever comes to the top of their head, they shoot their mouth. They want to hide behind their computer screens. So in regard to those types of people, right, when you're writing stories, has that ever really bothered you? I'm sure it doesn't necessarily bother you as much, assuming that you're the type of person that you are, based off when I met you the first time and as we're conducting the interview now. But also just describe to our listeners, especially when you work at the Post. The Post is one of the greatest sports institutions that we've had in New York ever, right? So describe the feeling of dealing with the good fans, the good readers, the bad fans, the bad readers. What are some of your better stories with better fans? What are some of your worst stories with fans who, quite frankly, don't appreciate your work as much?
All right. So, yeah, I mean, it's just interesting. You talked about the evolution. When I first started at the Bergen Record, I remember I once wrote that I did some freelance work for the Sporting News, which is still around. And I think at one point I wrote something to the effect of Derek Jeter can often be an unlikable lad. And I remember my wording. Unlike, I don't know where I came up with that, but I still remember it. And I remember I got like 5 nasty emails, and at the time, like my editors at the Record, and they all emailed it to the Record. I guess they just, and my editor's like, "Wow, what is this about? 5 emails? That's crazy." So things have evolved quite a bit since then. Now I can easily get 100 if it's a really controversial take on something. So yeah, look, I try to answer every reader email, and I've become friendly with some people. I've met them in person. who appreciated my work and I thought were very kind and intelligent, and I've actually made some friends. And I also had a blog with Newsday when blogs were on vogue. Probably, I think it was like from 2007 to the time I left in 2011. So there's like a few guys from that who I've like met in person and really enjoy staying in touch with. On the negative side, when it gets bad, when it gets really vicious or personal or anti-Semitic, I have to block their email address. On Twitter, it's a pretty high threshold for me to block someone. You really have to piss me off for me to block you. I just blocked that idiot Mike Silva. Do you know him? He writes about the Mets, I guess, somewhere.
Nope.
So yeah, I mean, he's like one of these pretends to be a Mets expert, and he kept ridiculing me for why do I keep mentioning COVID in my stories? Well, it's like because it's killed hundreds of thousands of people. So I just had to block him a few months ago. But yeah, I probably blocked maybe 20 people in over 10 years of being on Twitter. And when it comes to Twitter, I used to try to respond to every single comment I got, positive or negative. And I had to stop a couple of years ago, partly because of volume, but more because I just got fed up. And I remember it was when Manny Machado was a free agent, and I personally thought Manny would be a bad fit in New York. I just don't think Manny does well with media scrutiny. And I think he picked the right place in San Diego. And I was getting killed by fans. Oh, you're just a Yankees house man. You're just shilling for the Yankees. And I remember there was this one dude who I thought I had very amicable exchanges with for a very long time. And he was among that crowd. And and he was like, "Yeah, you're a shill for the Yankees. You have no integrity." I'm like, really?
No integrity.
I feel like I've been, we've had a nice cordial exchange of ideas for years, and that guy was really my breaking point. I was like, all right, well, on occasion I will look at comments on Twitter, but more often than not, I won't look.
How do you toe the line between, if you have a scoop, putting it out on Twitter first so you can get the breaking news and the credit, or putting it in the post or on thepost.com and get that out to the public?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple calculus for that one, Nick. It's really, if you have time to put it on the Post website, that's what my editors prefer, and I agree. I mean, that's better for our business. If it's an ultra competitive thing, where I remember like I won one of the years the Yankees re-signed Andy Pettitte, when he came back after the Astros. One of those years, I broke the story that he was back. Again, he pitched for them, become a free agent, was coming back again. So I broke that, and I knew just because I know my industry, like I didn't have time to put it, submit it to my editors and have them launch it online. I knew other people were going to have it very quickly, so I just tweeted it, and at least we get some credit that way. But yeah, that's the basic calculation there.
How were the winter meetings for you this year from home? I'm sure you're used to every December heading out to the winter meetings. And was it boring? Was it hard for you to do? How was the process like for that week?
There was no process. There was nothing. I mean, it was, literally there was, I think whatever essential business they had to get done, they did virtually. And it was actually the week after the scheduled winter meetings, there was some manager and general manager availabilities. But yeah, there seemed to be a misperception about that. Like, oh, they're holding the winter meetings virtually. They didn't hold the winter meetings, but there were no winter meetings. I mean, the winter meetings are what makes the winter meetings are having them in person and having the entire industry, set up shop in a hotel somewhere, in a big hotel. So it's not something you can even pretend to replicate virtually.
What do you think about the media availability through Zoom last season? I'm sure it continues this season, and heck, it might be here to stay. I think it's easier on the ball clubs. Probably harder for you guys though, writing. But what was your takes on having to do everything through Zoom?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agreed with the decision.
Absolutely.
Because I had, just as they had no interest in getting sick from me, guess what? I had no interest in getting sick from them. So I was fine with that decision. Obviously, yes, it hurts. It hurts my product to not be able to be in the clubhouse, to not be able to talk to people one-on-one and just witness all that. Yeah, it definitely hurt, and it's going to hurt at least at the start of this year. I remain cautiously optimistic that once these vaccines get distributed and once we go back somewhat to normal, that we will be back in that clubhouse, because I think ultimately everyone benefits from that. Even though the players complain about us being in there, they too benefit from just getting to know us in general.
Yes. So I want to double back now because we kind of skipped ahead a little bit. Now we've gone through the Zoom meetings and everything that happened this year. But you started at the Post. Now we're going almost 9 years. And you are now a national baseball writer and a columnist. And so I want to share with our listeners the primary differences from your role covering the specific beat of a team, as opposed to getting the additional responsibility of covering the sport on a national scale. So naturally, if you're covering a beat, the scope of everything you do is probably much more narrow. The avenues and the channels that you have to go through in order to cover the team are probably much more narrow, as opposed on a wider scale. So you've been there for 9 years, been national columnist quite some time. So what were what are the main differences between the two roles?
Well, the main difference is, and look, you're right. I think my title is actually baseball columnist, and my job it's a heavy focus on the Yankees and Mets. You know, we know where our bread is buttered. So if we're gonna write
major market in the world, but you do cover everything else, and the Machado point is the perfect example of that.
Yeah, but again, to swing back to Machado, we kind of New York guys that, I wrote about the Yankees' pursuit or lack thereof of him. You know, if a player, there are certainly players that transcend and that we'll write about who don't have an obvious New York connection, a Mike Trout or even a Juan Soto, guys like that. But yeah, most of my job centers around the Yankees and Mets. And so my job now, the primary difference is, more often than not, I'm writing a column with distinct opinions as opposed to a news story, even though news stories can have analysis in them and they don't have to just be the 5 W's. You can venture a little bit into opinion. When you write a column, it's an opinion piece. So it's just different. So that's what I'm doing most of the time. And that's the primary difference between my job and beat writer. I still will write some news stories. I'll fill in for the beat writers on occasion, particularly during the off season. I'll write feature stories and a lot of kind of analysis pieces. One big story, like the Lindor story last week, I wound up writing 3 stories the day that trade was announced. So yeah, it's a broader range of responsibilities, and I like the higher profile that comes with it.
So during your time, the last decade or so, you have been doing some TV as well. So MLB Now with Brian Kenny and your colleague Joel Sherman, who seems to basically be on every episode, SNY as well. How did that opportunity come about? Any hesitation going into TV, and what have you liked about it, and how is it different from the writing process?
Yeah, it's a much different craft, and I know at the beginning I was awful, really awful. Thankfully, I kept, I got some more reps to get better at it, and I still, as you guys can see we're talking video here, I'm a nodder. I'm a big nodder. I just kind of naturally nod when I'm agreeing with someone, even when I'm talking. And now Joe is nodding in agreement with my self-assessment. So that doesn't play great on TV. It kind of makes me look like I have a nervous, bobblehead. So I've worked to control that. But I've also been told by, I've actually worked with consultants who have said, don't worry about it. Just be yourself. Like, what's coming out of your mouth is good enough, that it won't, the nodding won't sufficiently take away from that. But I've really enjoyed doing TV. And you mentioned MLB Now, like going on with Brian Kenny is so much fun because he's just so prepared and like
He brings the intensity. He's
oh,
ready
he's
to
so
go.
intense, and it's all like for the good of the show. Like, you can throw some jabs at him and he'll laugh, and he gets it. He gets that it's just a show. So I've really enjoyed that, and yeah, I've done SNY, yes, a few ESPN hits here and there, but I've grown to enjoy TV, and again, I appreciate the fact that it has boosted my brand. I used to go on Fox 5 in New York locally all the time with Duke Castiglione. He now works in Boston.
Yeah. So what I love about Brian Kenny, I think, is the intensity and the fact that I think he's a true historian. I think the pieces that he does for the network are always well-intentioned, well-researched. I always think he provides a certain topic with an interesting perspective. And I think that's what ultimately makes him, really, really great at what he does. I work in Secaucus. Nick used to work in Secaucus. I'm a freelance employee for Major League Baseball, loosely with the network. Nick used to work there a little bit, so we have some real familiarity with that. So I wanted to ask, you do a lot of these TV appearances. What is your favorite time of the year to cover stuff, to do TV? Is it stuff that's happening throughout the season? Is it the trade deadline? Is it the playoffs? Is it the off season when a big signing or a big trade happens? Is it the winter meetings? Is it this time of the year? We're coming up on Hall of Fame time of the year. So what are your favorite times of the years to cover stuff, write about stuff, and do TV's hits?
I would say now, the off season, because I really like the hot stove stuff. I love the Hall of Fame stuff. I think this was where my personal strengths lie. Like, I think I'm pretty good at assessing the economics of the game. I have very strong beliefs about my Hall of Fame opinions, and I will die on that hill. I really have passionate opinions that I believe are very informed opinions. And yeah, it's just a fun time of year. I think during the season sometimes you get so caught up in the small samples of like, oh, the Yankees are having a hell of a week, or or a very bad week. What do they need to do? And it's like, oh, probably just keep playing baseball, and they're pretty good, and it's going to work out okay, at least in the regular season. So that's the regular season can be a bit of a grind in that way. I postseason is just fun because all of the drama and the stakes are so much higher. I love spring training too in normal times because everyone's relaxed, everyone's undefeated, and you can really take that time to get to know people better. But yeah, this is my favorite time of year.
And the weather's warmer. Can't forget about that. So you mentioned you love doing the Hall of Fame stuff. I'm not going to try to pry too much from you.
You can try, but you ain't getting it.
I ain't getting it. All right. Let's try from this angle. When you are contemplating what the names that are in front of you when you receive your ballot, and you're taking everything into account, what is, I would, again, not trying to pry too much, your strongest philosophical point when you're looking at the names on the ballot? What is the number one major determining factor for you personally when you check off those names and you are filling out your Hall of Fame ballot?
Well, I'm glad that you're not going to pry, but you can look at my past ballots to see where my beliefs are. I mean, you can infer that I have not changed my beliefs since last year. So I believe that the Hall of Fame is a museum. I believe that it is literally a museum. They charge admission to get in there, and they have paid employees with dental plans. They have a restroom, they have a cafeteria. It is a museum. It is not heaven. So, and when we talk about obviously steroids, now this year it gets even hairier with Curt Schilling, who's not the best human being to ever roam the earth, but he is one of the best pitchers to ever roam the earth. I really put that all aside because I do feel like if we look at who's in that special room of the museum, the room with all the plaques, there are some pretty terrible people in there already. People, not only people who were terrible on their own time, but who did terrible things within the confines of the game of baseball. So to draw lines now at steroids, at disgusting, biased beliefs, I think would do an injustice to the Hall of Fame. Even if there is the often cited language about character on my ballot, I feel like that has largely been ignored, and to suddenly start looking at that would constitute selective outrage.
That's a very fair point. For me personally, as a fan, my criteria is very, very simple. Give me a sustained period, probably a baseline of maybe 8 years, 10 years, 12 years of production that is near the upper echelon of your peers. And I do agree with you in the sense that there are people in the hall who are not the best people. It is a business and it is a museum. And when you go there, you want snippets and you want a snapshot of baseball history. So I agree with your points. I think you sufficiently answered that question, and I appreciate the fact that you decided to answer the question the way you did. So thank you. Now let's get to the fun stuff. You mentioned before the Machado and the Yankees stuff, so I want to try to bring this back full circle to some topics that were happening today. As a huge Yankees fan, I'm pissed we haven't signed DJ LeMahieu yet. I don't know what's taken so long.
By the time this episode comes out, he may be signed. So
let's hope not. Let's hope not. But for purposes of now, this topic now, he is not signed. He wants the term he wants. He wants the money that he wants. He's been near the tops of the American League MVP voting now for the past couple of years. I think his production warrants what he's asking for. What is the deal with the Yankees? Why haven't they signed him yet?
Basically, stare down, staring contest, and just a disagreement over DJ's value. DJ is an unusual entity in that he was kind of one player before he signed with the Yankees, and then a dramatically better player since joining the Yankees. And he's at the age now where players often see their production drop off. So I think that's where you're seeing this staring contest. And as you know, Joe, I mean, none of the big free agents have signed. I mean, we just had Liam Hendriks sign this week with the White Sox, and that's been the biggest one so far.
Do you think that's an issue? Because I feel like over the past couple of years, this is now becoming a recurring issue where we're going into January and February, and we're not having as many flashy signing storylines that we tend to. In the past, I believe this was all taken care of in November and December, and I think people were waiting for this time of the year to see what would happen. Now you're seeing that process starting to get prolonged a little bit. Do you think that's hurting baseball right now?
Yeah, look, I think it's you have to look at both sides of it. Yeah, I mean, certainly when you look at how the NBA operates in particular, like that 10-day period, it's phenomenal, right? I mean, it really is. I pay it. I don't watch any NBA games, but I those 10 days, I'm engaged.
That's the best part of the season, the off season.
Yeah. So I mean, baseball could benefit from that, but then on the flip side, then no one thinks about the NBA again until I guess they have summer league or whatever. But no one really thinks about it until the season starts, and even then, I'm not so sure. Yeah, there would be a benefit to that, but the reality is the NBA has a salary cap and baseball doesn't, and that's why there's the dramatically different timelines there.
Now, between your peers and yourself, what were your thoughts about Steve Cohen buying the Mets? Were you all like, wow, now we're going to have some things to write about? There's going to be some competition angles between the Mets and the Yankees. And how much easier has it been for you to be able to, this offseason, write these articles about the Mets, knowing that Steve Cohen is going to potentially spend the money on the big time free agents or continue to look to acquire the big name tickets through trades?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's any easier or harder. It's different. It is more exciting, no doubt about that. And it was encouraging, I thought, just to see the reaction from Mets fans and from all of baseball, just to see that level of engagement with Steve Cohen. And they have, I guess you could say, they and the Padres have been the most aggressive teams in the entire industry in terms of trying to improve their clubs. So they haven't landed a big free agent, but obviously the Lindor trade was gargantuan, and then a couple of the supplemental signings, McCann and Trevor May.
So you've had a career now that spans almost 30 years, especially right here in the New York market. You've had an advantage that I don't think a lot of other people are afforded. Who are some of your favorite players, managers, coaches, front office executives, maybe league employees that you've got to interview and cover over the years? And who was the best person in terms of giving you sound bites or quotes that really, really help make your stuff better?
So I'll stick with retired people, so I don't offend any active people. I might offend them by including them. So there's really that's no win. So yeah, in terms of retired guys, David Cohn is as a legendary, helpful person, and I still get to see him because he's a Yankees broadcaster. I loved Hideki Matsui, even though he largely worked through a translator. He could speak enough English to have a off the record conversation. Then he was very helpful on the record with his translator. Joe Torre was extremely helpful. David Wright, just one of the biggest gentlemen you'll ever meet. LaTroy Hawkins, extremely helpful. Michael Kadire, very, very helpful. So those are some of the names. I was trying to think another manager. Bobby V. Yeah, I gotta love Bobby. Bobby is a trip, and I was just texting with Bobby last week about Tommy Lasorda passing. So he's definitely one of my favorite people.
Yeah, I got to ask you about Mets managers real quick, because at the time you were a national baseball writer. What was it like covering the Willy Randolph firing at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning? We had Jay Horowitz on with us, and he said that was probably one of the lowlights of his career, having to send that press release out. Yeah,
so the Mets were in Anaheim when they did that. So they fired Willy after a game out there. So hence the ridiculous timing of the announcement. I remember, I think I was in New York. I was home, so that was 2008, and I remember I think maybe I got a phone call from Fox 5, probably around 6 a.m. saying, "Hey, you want to talk about Willy Randolph's firing?" I was like, "What?" So one of those deals. And I remember I think I probably woke up my editor at Newsday at the time, like, "Hey, the Mets fired Willy Randolph," and he's like, "What?" So, but I remember I got on a plane by whatever time it was, and made it to Anaheim in time for the press conference with Omar Minaya and Jerry Manuel. And that was certainly a very memorable day in my career.
This point just came to mind as you were answering that, and I feel like you're probably one of the best people we could ask about this. What was it like covering the 2000 World Series? Because that was a very, very special time for Nick and I and all of New York. And when we look throughout baseball history, especially our generation, I mean, that was when we were 8 years old, something we all remember. Everybody remembers Piazza and Clemens and the bat and everything surrounding that series. So what was it like covering that?
Yeah, that was exhausting. And it's interesting. I mentioned earlier about the time I called Jeter an unlikable lad. And I think it was probably that week because they were Yankee. And my colleague Joel Sherman wrote about this back in October. We did a whole package on the 20th anniversary of the Subway World Series. And Joel wrote about how cranky those Yankees were by that point, because they were in their third straight World Series. And
the poor things.
I know they were just exhausted, and just
Yeah,
just
Clemens didn't know if it was a ball or a bat. He couldn't tell what the difference was.
yeah.
Were they exhausted because they were not particularly great that season? They only won 87 games in 2000. There were a lot of questions well into September with that team, and they kind of really got it together. I would say the final month or so, they really, really took off. That season was kind of a little more up and down, probably the most up and down of all the years in that.
Well, they were horrible to end the regular season. They were horrible. They backed into the playoffs, so there were questions entering the first week of the postseason for them. But yeah, I'm sure that was part of it, that they just weren't that good. And I think it was just, it really, wears down on you to play that many games over all those years. And I do think just the fact that they were playing the Mets, I think just the pressure from George Steinbrenner and from the fans, I think all of that just kind of ate at them. And they were just really an unhappy group of guys at that point, including Jeter. The games themselves were fantastic. And even putting aside Piazza Clemens, which is not easy to do because that was epic, the games were terrific and a lot of great, memorable moments with, Timo Perez and the throw that Jeter made to get him out, and then Jeter's home run, first pitch of Game 4, and obviously Luis Sojo's game winner, and then to throw Clemens Piazza on top of that. My God, it was really just one of the very exhausting but very fun week to cover. And the good news for me was I didn't have to travel at all. I could stay home the whole week.
Press box must have been jam packed more than you ever could imagine with a World Series.
Yeah, for sure.
We got one last question for you before we let you go. 9/11, the Piazza home run, and everything else that followed it. What was it like covering that?
I was not there the night that Piazza hit the home run. I was still the Yankees beat writer at that point. So I think I was in Baltimore with the Yankees. But that was a crazy, crazy time. Obviously, we were all suffering. We're all in pain. I remember I knew several people who were in the Twin Towers that died. So just to go back to covering baseball, and it was really, definitely a sense of unity throughout the country that we sure as hell don't have now. And I remember, I got to see Piazza home run from afar. Now I've rewatched it countless times and rebroadcast, and I get choked up every time I watch it, just seeing how the crowd reacts. It was like the crowd surprised itself, by how happy it was. Just like this, understand, we can still really get excited about a baseball game. It was, and then the Yankees, their run that October was phenomenal because, largely the same team from 2000. Mike Messina was the one big addition, but essentially the same lineup. And again, they were exhausted, less cranky, I think, because the Mets weren't in the playoffs. And when they beat the A's in that first round series with the Jeter, the flip play, I think they were just so happy, and it was really an upset victory. That A's team was so much better than them. And then they upended the Mariners with the 116 win Mariners, and then the games 3, 4, and 5 against the Diamondbacks. So even though they lost that series, they brought so much joy to their fan base, and I think they knew that. And I remember Game 5 against the Diamondbacks, Scott Brosius' 2-run game-tying homer with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th off Kim, and second night in a row, game-tying 2-run homer, 2 outs. And it was, first of all, just the shock of the back-to-back nights like that, and second of all, the emotion of 9/11. And again, I get paid to not care who wins, who loses, but it was a very emotional night. I remember feeling just overwhelmed emotionally, just thinking about the people I knew had died, thinking about the people in the stands suffering, and the joy they felt at that very moment. So really an incredible time to cover baseball.
Yeah, I knew the Piazza moment was a very special moment for Nick, but I'm really happy that you got to elaborate on the Yankees run and impending World Series run that ensued right after it. And obviously, you can mention George Bush, the first pitch, one of the all-time great Game Sevens. I think that series is just outstanding. So, thank you for your input there. Really, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for doing this. My last point to you is something that you may have gotten before. I don't know how often. But you and Christian Bale look exactly alike.
Huh.
Like,
Really?
same type of voice. Yeah, I see it. I
All
absolutely
right.
see it.
Wow.
Nick's smiling over there.
I guess Ken's gonna join Keaton and Affleck in the next Batman movie.
Man, oh man! Wait till my wife finds out she's married to a Christian Bale lookalike.
I would put a picture side by side of you and him. I don't know if there's a 100% look-alike, but I definitely think there is some resemblance. And the way you answered some of the questions with your voice, it sounds exactly like Bale in the Batman movies, and that was
All right. That might be the highest praise I've ever received in my entire life. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you again for coming on. We really, really enjoyed this. What we do is we always give our guests the last word here. So if there's anything you would like to share, if anything you would like to promote, go ahead. The floor is all yours. Once again, thank you for coming on. We wish you, your wife, we saw her in the
Don't say it. Don't say it. $150 fine. Do not wish her a happy new year.
150.
I'm going to
150.
hope that you have a better year than last year was, and I hope you, your family, stay safe. And the last words are yours.
Thanks, guys. No, I don't really have anything to promote beyond my Twitter handle is @Ken Davidoff, and I write for the New York Post. And thank you for your support. But I wish both of you a better 2021 than we just endured in 2020.
All right, that's going to do it here for our very special guest, Ken Davidoff, for my coach, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.